introduce it. Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Goldberg. This afternoon, I would like to introduce Jonty Blackman. Jonty Blackman is a freelance educator and tour guide. His professional skills are education, management and coordination, and communication. He's a great communicator. He's got 22 years of experience in managing his own educational and tour guiding business, which services including customized educational and tour guiding services, lectures and workshops, online and also in person. People that he has done this for include Jewry University, the tour groups Israel Maven, Go Inspire, Giant Leap, Birthright Group, through to the Roots Travel and Orthodox Union. Also, he does it for individual families and tourist groups. He's done another one for Classrooms Without Borders. In 2014, he was invited to become the Director of Experiential Department of Jewish Education in Sydney, Australia, where he was in charge of the development of and oversight of the school-wide Jewish experiential educational programs and activities. Previously, 10 years before, he had been scholar in residence in many United States Jewish communities, the Colorado Agency of Jewish Education, the Agency of Jewish Learning in Pittsburgh, Kansas Jewish Community, Jewish communities across Canada, and so on. He has a master's degree in Jewish education from Hebrew University. He has a BA in English Literature and Psychology from University of South Africa, Pretoria. And he's also studied at Yeshivat Har Etzion here in Israel. And he has served as well in the army on the Home Front Command. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jonty. The floor is yours.
Hi, Henry. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for coming and joining us today. And it's wonderful to see some familiar faces. I want to share a story that many of us know a number of the details, but I'd like to try and share a few stories that perhaps you don't know, some of the backstories behind the creation of the State of Israel. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. And then I want to begin in that way as we go through the story of the creation of the State of Israel. Now, being very aware of our unfortunate situation that we're not able just to freely be Matayel Eretz Israel, I'm going to take us from different places. We're going to start in the Judean Desert. And as we start in the Judean Desert, we're going to move through to Jerusalem and take a little jump into Beit Lechem. From Beit Lechem, we'll come back to Jerusalem and then land up in Tel Aviv, where the State of Israel itself was established. And just before we end, we're going to return to Jerusalem on the hills of Ein Karim, before there was Yad Vashem and before there was a Hadassah hospital on the hills of Ein Karim, and that's where we're going to end. And so with this, I want to try and just share with you, if we ask ourselves the question, where does the creation of the state, the establishment of the State of Israel, that David Ben-Gurion so eloquently states in Tel Aviv on that fateful day, the 14th of May, 1940, where does that story begin? Now, we could go back 2,000 years, we could go back even before that, but if we try on the modern day story, I want to take us to the summer of 1947. And I want to take us in the summer of 1947, the Judean Desert. Those of you familiar with the site will know that we're at Qumran. And here at Qumran, in the Judean Desert, overlooking the Dead Sea, something incredible happens that summer of 1947. We owe that incredible happening to these two men. These two men, two Bedouin shepherds from the Tamira tribe, who as they're walking through the deserts, they're looking for things while they're looking after their sheep. The truth is they're also involved in smuggling different things and trying to see what they could find in order to sell off elsewhere. And as part of them walking through the desert sun and being a little bit bored, they start throwing stones to see who could throw a stone further than the other, competing with each other. They eventually look at the holes, the caves in the side of the desert and in the Judean Desert. And as they try to get the stone into the cave, They hear a thud. They try again, missing. Try again. They get it into the cave, yet they hear a thud. And suddenly then, as they throw, they hear a crash. They look at each other and they go, what's that? No, stones on walls go thud, they don't go crash. And so they clamber up into the cave. And this is what they find. What we now know as the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered by these two Bedouin shepherd men as they are going through the desert in 1947. Now, the question is what happens with these scrolls and what is so important? Number one, as you look at the actual picture of the scrolls, you're able to notice that they are covered in sand, covered in rocks, not what we have seen as we go to the Israel Museum to look at them. We also don't see the writing on them yet. And even though these men will see the writing, they won't be able to read what's on these scrolls because they are illiterate. They know the desert, they can read the desert, they can read the dunes, but they cannot read the actual writing here. So they take these scrolls Bethlehem to a man called Kando. Kando happens to be a cobbler. He's a shoe merchant. And they want to sell the leather to him in order for him to make shoes. And he looks at these scrolls and he says, this is fantastic leather. I want more leather. Go back and find more for me. And what we, thankfully, he's not just a cobbler. He's also an antiquities dealer. And as an antiquities dealer, he realizes this leather is not valuable for shoes. This leather is far more valuable for other things. He also happens to be a Syrian Orthodox Christian. That means that when he davens in Aramaic. And so as he davens in Aramaic, he's able to read Hebrew lettering. And so as he opens the scroll, he's able to read the scrolls. And some of the scrolls, as we know, being biblical, he'll even recognize some of this writing. He's so overwhelmed and excited. He takes it to a man in the old city. And suddenly, this man starts to hear about the scroll. This man is a man called Eliezer Sukenik. Eliezer Lipa Sukenik was the head, or basically he formed the archaeological department at Hebrew University in the 1920s. He is so excited when he hears about these scrolls. He goes to Bethlehem in order to try and get these scrolls, and he manages to buy 3 scrolls of Kando. But what's fascinating is this. When Sukenik describes his first encounter with the Megillot, with the scrolls, this is what he says in his diary. My hand shook as I started to unwrap one of them. I read a few sentences. It was written in beautiful biblical Hebrew. The language was like that of Tehillim, but the text was unknown to me. And here I'll add, because we have a lot of other texts that weren't necessarily part of the Tanakh, part of what we would call the Sfarim HaChitzonim, the Apocrypha that also were discovered there. So the language was like that of Tehillim, but the text was unknown to me. I looked and looked, and I suddenly had the feeling that I was privileged by destiny to gaze upon a Hebrew scroll which had not been read for more than 2,000 years. And I want you to feel that moment as Eliezer Sukenik realizes that he is granted this privilege by destiny as if he is the shaliach holding on to these scrolls. So he comes back to Yerushalayim, he comes back by bus, he comes home, he's enthralled by what he's seeing. He keeps on reading and reading and reading. And in another entry into his diary, he says this. While I was examining these precious documents in my study, my son Mati was in the next room, twiddling radio knobs in an effort at New York. And I was engrossed in a particularly absorbing passage in one of the scrolls when my son rushed in with the shout that the vote for the Jewish state had passed. And because we know what they're talking about, we now understand that the day that Eliezer Sukenik buys these scrolls on behalf of Hebrew University is the 29th of November, 1947. And Mati, his son, is listening to the UN vote in Lake Success, declaring whether partition plan would actually go through it or not. And as we know, 33 votes voted yes, 13 against, 10 abstentions. Partition plan was approved. Basically, the concept being at that time that Our two warring people who are living in the land here are not able to live together. The United Nations, in an attempt to try and work out, what are we going to do when the British leave? Because they have said that they are leaving the land of Palestine by August of 1948. What are we going to do? They had come up with the decision, or with the recommendation, that let's partition this land into two, one for a Jewish state, one for an Arab state. And as we know, we absolutely celebrate. Sukenik will describe how, as the Shaliach holding onto the scrolls, he cannot believe the excitement that Chavtet b'November was for him. Because it was as if the first time in history, the nations of the world now declared that the Jewish people have a right to this land. Even if we don't have a right to all of it, even if we have to share, the Jewish people are connected and have a right. On that same day, it's as if the ground itself has been waiting for 2,000 years, holding these treasures in safekeeping for the rightful owners to come back and to take hold of their treasures. As if the ground is saying, here, my people, look what you wrote 2,000 years ago. For Sukenik, the story of Zionism was of cosmic proportions. It begins in the yearnings of the Jewish people to come home. It begins or continues as they do come home, as they build what they build, as they search and try to understand who they are and what this land is. And it, in a certain sense, comes to a climax, that 29th of November, 1947. And as we know, Jews around the world are celebrating as they hear that we will have a state, even if it's not exactly, it's not as big as we want, even if Jerusalem and Bethlehem are not going to be a part of it. And we know that the Arab community at the time refuses to accept it. And so the 30th of November, 1947, is the beginning of what we know as Milchemet HaShichrur. A bus is bombed in the Tachana Merkazit in Tel Aviv, and from there will be tremendous battles. We know that those battles will rage for 14 months until the February of 1940. It begins in the Tachana Merkazit in Tel Aviv. It will continue in many places that many of us have gone and traversed as we've gone either towards Gush Etzion, as this picture of these convoys going towards Gush Etzion, or if we've gone up north, the area of Yechiam, of Rosh HaNikra, near Akko, where another convoy trying to bring food and water to the besieged Jewish communities or the isolated communities, trying to help them manage. This will continue for months. December of 1947, January, February, and even March of 48. By the time we get to the end of March 1948, David Ben-Gurion makes a decision that no longer are we going to be sitting ducks as if we are, waiting and defending the communities which we have set up wherever we are. Rather, we're going to go out and attack. We're like what they called Operation Nachshon, Operation D. We're going out to attack in order to defend, in order to help ourselves. And while this is going on, the British, seeing the chaos that is going on, decide they are not leaving in August of 48. Rather, they bring their departure earlier, the 15th of May, 1940. The place is in chaos. The British have stopped looking after the area from the point of view of the roads and point of view of electricity and water supply and everything else that goes with it. And within this vacuum, the Jewish community have to decide what are they going to do. And so they set up what we know as Moetzet Ha'am, the People's Council, that is going to try and work out what are we going to do when the British actually leave. But they have no idea how to really deal with this because it's come upon them so quickly. And so they try to start working out, number one, are we able to take our underground movements, our underground forces, and try to do something with them? What about trying to use our political persuasion? And they send representatives all over the world to try and work out what will be the day the British leave. If in this crazy system where we have a war going on, we will declare our state, will we have support from the rest of the world? And one of the biggest attempts was in the USA, where Chaim Weizmann goes to try and meet with Truman, who at first refuses to meet with him, but different people try to speak with all the different representatives in the United States, trying to get them to support us. It won't be the only, direction that we go. most important, because George Marshall, who was then the Secretary of State, is absolutely adamant that this is not the time for the Jewish people to declare any kind of state. The UN has said that we should separate into two different states. Things are not the way they should be. There is chaos. His suggestion, and it was taken by the State Department, was that there should be a UN trusteeship over this area. And he tries to send messages to Ben Gurion. He never ever met with Ben Gurion, but sending messages to him to say, do not do this. He meets with Moshe Shertok, who later will change his name to Sharet, and he will be our second Prime Minister of the State of Israel. Moshe Shertok meet with him, then Shertok will meet with him in Washington and will be told by George Marshall, do not do this. If you declare a state now, number one, you will not survive. Number two, we will not support you. And Moshe Shertok turns to George Marshall and says to him, we are not requesting your permission. We're just asking that when we do take the step that we do, you do not interfere. At the same time, diplomatic work or movement has been taking place in Jordan. Golda Meir has been sent to meet with King Abdullah a number of times. She meets with him actually twice. She has conversations with him more than that. But when she meets with him, especially at the end of April, beginning of May 1948, the idea is this. In the midst of this war, the Arab states around what was then Palestine, Eretz Israel, were saying to the Jewish community, if you declare a state, we are going to attack. Until now, the battle has been a local battle between local Arabs and local Jews. We're very aware that some of those Arab states were already supporting the local Fedayeen who were going against us. But Golda Meir tries to speak to Abdullah and say to him, look, you understand that if we are here, your kingdom will also be much safer. Support us. And eventually, when she comes back to Tel Aviv on the 12th of May 1948, there still has not yet been a decision what's going to happen on the 15th when the British leave. On the 12th of May 48, Golda Meir says, Abdullah is not with us. He has said to me, I don't live alone. I live amongst my people, and I will have to go with where the rest of the Arab leaders are going. So the US is not exactly supportive, it seems, even though we will later on find out that Truman had given his support to Weizmann, but certainly not the official channels represented by George Marshall said we're not supporting. Golda Meir says we can't do this. Ben Gurion gets his people together. One of the people that he gets is Yigal Yadin as the leader of the Haganah, as the head of the Haganah, and says to him, what will happen if we have to go to war? If we declare a state and we go to war, can we survive? And Yadin says to him, it's a 50-50 chance. But what I'm really worried about is the morale of our people, knowing that they're no longer just fighting like they have been these last few months, but they're fighting against such odds of 6 different Arab countries that promised to invade. And so the Moetzet Ha'am, or at least the inner provisional government, the 13 people who were supposed to make decisions, especially of defense, they have to decide, and this is the question, do we declare a state in the midst of a war? Or do we wait till the war is over and then we declare a state? The question is not whether we declare a state or not. We will declare a state. The question is now or maybe later. Because what ason, what tragedy will we bring upon the people if we declare it now? And huge deliberations take place. It's not all 13 because 3 of the members couldn't get there. One of them, Chaim Weizmann, is in the US trying to push Truman and trying to get support from him still. Another 2 are in Jerusalem and are besieged and cannot get to Tel Aviv. So 10 people are discussing, a minyan is discussing, should we declare a state now or not? They go to vote. And what do you think the vote is? Well, it's a little unclear because the protocols of the actual meeting do not exist anymore. Either someone didn't want us to know exactly what took place, but the actual protocols of the meeting are not fully there. what the messages that came out with this, when they took the first vote, should we declare a state now, or should we wait later until the war is over and then declare a state? 5 people said declare now. And 5 people said, let's wait until it's over. Ben Gurion says, I'm not leaving this room until there is a decision. And 1 person changes their mind. And on a vote of 6 to 4, the state of Israel will be declared. 1 person's vote perhaps changed certainly Jewish history, but maybe even world history as we go towards the declaration of state. And so this is now the 12th of May, 1948. It's a Wednesday. The 15th of May, 1948 is a Shabbat. And as we are aware, the British were leaving at 12 o'clock that night, at midnight, between the 14th and the 15th. The question is, when do we declare a state then? Do we wait till the British have gone? Or in the vacuum of them being gone, do we have to wait? Because how can we declare a state on Shabbat after 2,000 years, even if we're not a religious community altogether? So the decision is taken. We're going to declare the state 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the 14th of May, 1948. And now we have basically 2 days to prepare the declaration of state. I want to share with you, look at the invitation that goes out to those who are invited, the 300 delegates who were invited to the place where the state would be declared. Notice how it starts, min Ehle Ta'am, the provisional government in waiting as such, Tel Aviv, Daled Tashach, the 13th of May, 1948. The invitation goes out 1 day before declaration of state. And it says to us, we're going to invite you to the sitting of the Declaration of Independence. It's going to take place on the 14th of May, 1948. And where's it going to take place? In the hall of the museum. Which museum? Well, in those days, in 1948, Tel Aviv only has 1 museum. It's the Museum of Art, which is Shderot Rothschild 16, and I imagine that many of you have been there since. We request of you to keep this secret. Everyone's asked to get there at 3:30. This is probably the last time that Israel ever had an event starting on time. This is a personal invitation. Aka, don't bring your grandparents, don't bring your auntie's cat, don't bring everyone else. Remember, this is you and you only. We don't have place. And get dressed up. But here's the fascinating thing. What do you think happens when somebody gets this invitation and it says that we're asking you to keep the secret? Well, this is what happened. Thousands of people come outside the museum on 16th Rothschild. This is what David Ben Gurion, who had requested that it be kept secret, this is what greets him. Now you may ask, look at the building, it doesn't look such an incredible, impressive building. Why did they choose this building in order to declare the state? They could have used the Beit Knesset HaGadol or other Batei Knesset in Tel Aviv. There were some beautiful ones at the time. They could have used Habima. Habima was a beautiful theater. They chose this building because look at it. It almost looks like a fortress. The windows are small, and the actual hachrazah, the actual declaration will be in the lower floor, which is basically a basement with high windows. What's fascinating is to think this. When it was originally decided that the museum would be the place where the state would be declared, is because it was safe. But afterwards, when you try to look at layers of meaning, notice this picture from 1906. It's the lottery of the first 66 families who decided to leave Jaffa and go to set up an area they called Achuzat Bayit, which later on becomes known as Tel Aviv. The spot that they're standing on is the spot where the building we just saw stands, 16 Rothschild Boulevard. In those days, the dunes were flattened. The dunes became the area, the tops of the dunes became the area where all the buildings are going to be built. The streets become the valleys of the dunes. And that's what you're seeing. They're standing in the middle of Rock Boulevard. When they eventually built it by 1909, look at what the first street looks like. And if you look on the screen here on my right, this building here, this is the building that will be the house of Mayor Dizengoff, the first mayor of Tel Aviv. This will be his house, and it is his house that he will then bequeath to Tel Aviv to create the first art museum. Just on the side is, look at this first kiosk. Those of you who've been to the area will know that today it's an espresso bar. Fantastic coffee is sold here. But the first kiosk was actually a compromise. When they first set up Tel Aviv, there was not to be one store in Tel Aviv. But the heat was too much, so they allowed people to sell gazoz, to sell soda water in this kiosk. And just one more thing, if you look at the building here in the background, this is the first water tower of Tel Aviv. What a mess. To have running water in buildings was a huge thing. But either way, we go back to this building. So the building is Tel Aviv. The building becomes the first museum, the art museum of Tel Aviv. And after the ceremony is over, it returns to be the art museum. It's only in the 1970s that, with a historical perspective, people say, are you crazy? How can we not have this place as a place of pilgrimage? And I imagine that some of you have been to the place. You can't go to visit it, not just because of Corona, but they're doing ship with them. And it's going to take around 3 years, they say, until eventually we can go back into the building. So let's just take a step back. As we go into the building itself, everything's been set up. But how? Well, the 12th of May, 1948, they decide we're going to actually have this happening on the 14th of May. They send out invitations, and then they got to get busy. So they get people from, the People's Council to go to Hamashpir, the local store, to buy the fabric that is the backdrop that you see in front of you. They don't have enough money, so they go to the local cafes, the coffee shops around the area, and they borrow the chairs. And if carefully, you'll notice not all the chairs match each other because of that. They take the portrait of Herzl, José Medina, from the offices of the JNF that are in northern Tel Aviv, and they bring it here. And they take the flags that were there too. They get them laundered, they get them pressed, and they hang them up here. Even what you see here on the podium, the actual recording equipment is borrowed from a store just up the road, a recording store or a sound store that was prepared to lend the material. Very, very tsanua, very, very rushed. The only thing they actually built for this event was the actual podium that you see here, 2 carpenters working on it day and night so that it would be ready for the 14th of May, 1948. Now, when you think about that, the crowds are waiting for this incredible event. But what are the leaders doing in that day? The whole of that Thursday, the 13th, the whole of the Friday, the 14th, they are deliberating. And as Jews can only do, they're arguing what is going to be the content in this actual declaration, and back and forth and all sorts of things I'm not going to go into now, but certainly it's a discussion of what they were really arguing about. But the bottom line is this. By 2:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon, that's only when they finish deciding what is actually going to be included in the declaration. And the plan was to have this beautiful leather scroll, think back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, like a Sefer Torah, and to get a sofer to write on the gvil, on the actual parchment, the words of our declaration. That will be presented to all the delegates at the event, and they would sign the actual document. Well, there was no time for that. Zev Sharf is the secretary of the People's Council. He's working with the secretarial staff, and they're frantically typing up all the last changes. And basically, Ben-Gurion, when he does read the Declaration of Independence, he will read it from typed out notes. But what's fascinating is this. Zev Sharf gets everybody ready. Everybody, when they finish the discussions around 2:30, they go home to shower, to prepare, to get dressed in their big day hug to come to the event. Zev Sharf continues with the secretarial staff, and then he realizes after he's organized everything for this event, and he's got transportation for every delegate who's going to be there. He realizes, oh my God, I've got to organize myself transportation. He runs out of the building of the JNF where they're having the deliberations, and he can't find a cab. So he basically flags down some driver. The driver happens to be a young kid. He jumps into the car and says to the guy, I need to get in. You have to take me to Rothschild Boulevard. And the guy says to him, I can't do that. I got to get home. I'm going to listen on radio to the Declaration of Independence. Scharf says to him with a twinkle in his eyes, listen, my friend, if you don't take me to Rothschild Boulevard, you will not be listening to the Declaration of Independence because there won't be one. I have it here in my hand. And so they speed through the crowds as they're coming towards southern Tel Aviv, and they get stopped by a traffic officer on the way. They find out the car was borrowed. The guy driving doesn't have a license, and they want to be given the officer wants to give them a ticket. And Scharf says to him, listen, there is no authority at the moment. I have the authority in my hand. You can't do this to us. And he waves them on. He gets to the actual museum 1 minute, 4 o'clock, when this was supposed to begin. David Ben-Gurion has already arrived at the site. You see here himself and his wife Paula getting out of their car, walking up the stairs into the Hall of Independence, which we call now, but then called the Israel Museum. They then go down the stairs towards the main hall, and Ben-Gurion is about to declare the state. He has no idea of the fiasco that was happening beforehand, and Scharf hands him the pieces of paper, and from these pieces of paper, Ben-Gurion reads the declaration. You can see, if you look at the picture here, you can see in his hands the reading of the actual declaration. And many of us will know the words so clearly as he stands very proudly saying, Anu machrizim bazot ala kama medina Yehudit be'eretz Israel, hi medinat Israel. That we hereby declare the creation of a Jewish state. Now I'm going to stop here because until that moment, nobody knew what was going to be the name of the Jewish state. Therefore, Ben-Gurion declares a Jewish state to be known as Medinat Israel. And the crowds cheer and sing, and it's incredible. But no one knows the name. And why is that? Because they were arguing over the name. Some said it should be called Yehuda, like the ancient areas. Some said it should be called Palestina Ma'aravit. There were a whole lot of different arguments. Maybe Tzion, they say. Ben-Gurion said it should be called Israel, the same name as the land, the same name as the people, so too the name of the state. The land, the people, and the state. Now, it takes Ben-Gurion 17 minutes to declare the actual state. And here I'm actually just going to go back to that picture. Here I want to just share a personal story that came to me when I was once in Kansas. I was in Kansas in order to go and do some lecturing, and the rabbi who brought me out says to me, because a snowstorm had started, says, listen, you're not going to have anyone today. I'm putting you in a car. You're going with one of the members of the Jacobson family, who were the business partners of Harry Truman in those days in 1948 and before that, and says, I'm going to take you to the presidential life of Harry Truman in Independence, Missouri. So off we drive. I'd never been to a presidential library. Those of you who've been will know how incredible it is to see these presidential libraries and everything that goes with it. But what shocked me the most was when I get into one of the major rooms of 1948, a huge room with an entire wall dedicated to Truman's decision to support the state of Israel against the advice of his Secretary of State and the State Department. And he later on will say to Jacobson and to Weizmann that I wanted to make sure that the decisions are taken by myself, not by those people working the offices. And so look at this letter, the original letter, or a copy of the original of that Harry Truman writes. It comes through 11 minutes after the state was established. And he says like this: this government has been informed that a Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and recognition has been requested by the provisional government thereof. The United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new Jewish state, in typed letters. But notice how Harry Truman, now just hearing that this new Jewish state is going to be called the State of Israel, crosses out those 3 words, the new Jewish state, and adds in his own writing, State of Israel, signs it, sends it. He doesn't want to, he wants to beat the signals. As I stood there looking at the letter, I said to myself, it's a story that I'd learned in the books about how there was a discussion about what the name would be. It's absolutely incredible. Another incredible thing is that the State of Israel gives Harry Truman a gift of, in 1949 in recognition of his efforts. It's a Sefer Torah. What we're actually looking at is not the Sefer Torah itself, but rather the Aron of the Sefer Torah. But if you look carefully at the words, you're able to notice they are all psukim about Torah. Some of you will be able to notice there how it says Meshivat Nafesh, Machkimat Peti, Torah Hashem Tamima is obviously the pasuk. A lot of different psukim. But what's fascinating is the actual crown, the keter that you look at on the Torah, or on the Aron. I couldn't work out the wording on the actual top of the letters. And then there was some other, ordinary individual who was there at the time, and he says to me, what does that say? Took me a while, and then I picked it up. The words say, Hasne bo'er ba'esh, v'hasne einenu ukal. The keter that is sitting on top of the Aron of the Sefer Torah given to Harry Truman in recognition for his efforts is the wording that we almost were consumed, and you were part of making sure that we didn't. I think a very beautiful piece. So just a little diversion as we go from the story of the actual signing. Here you see the picture of the signing of the declaration. Notice here how you've got the actual scroll. You've got Moshe Sharetia holding it. The scroll is actually empty because they didn't have time to actually write the declaration. Here, if you look in front of Ben Gurion, this is where the declaration has been typed up. The Sofer will later on write on this declaration. In fact, what he'll have to do, he'll have to cut the actual scroll because there's not enough space. And so then you're going to have 3 separate pieces, but he's going to sew it up like you would sew a Sefer Torah so that the wording of the declaration is there. The other little thing, I think just a nice little anecdote, notice here you've got the word tzlil, sound. It's the name of the sound store, the recording store that loaned their equipment. Notice this is the first advert in the State of Israel. They insisted that their name be there, but that was what they got back in return for loaning the equipment. And if we're talking about the first ad in the State of Israel, what happens then is this. It takes basically all in all 17 minutes, another 15 minutes of signing. Ben Gurion leaves the hall by saying, Medinat Yehudit Kama Tama Shiva Hazot. The State of Israel is established. This meeting is adjourned. Off he walks. He goes down the stairs of Independence Hall, takes a right on Rothschild Boulevard to the corner of Nahalat Binyamin, and there he meets these 2 people. They're traffic officers issuing a parking ticket to his car. It was parked in a non-parking zone, and so there you have it. The first parking ticket in the State of Israel is given to the Prime Minister of Israel. They eventually let it go, but so it is. Everybody is so excited as it happens, but Ben Gurion has to go home to prepare for a battle. Not just one battle, but a war. And we're very aware that that night the Egyptians will fly over Tel Aviv and already start bombing Tel Aviv. And so the war will get worse and worse as eventually it will turn and we will achieve the State of Israel as we know it. But what I want to do is just, if you bear with me just for a few more moments, I promise you that I will take you back to Ein Karim, to Jerusalem. If at the 4:30, 5 o'clock, this is the scene that you see outside the Hall of Independence in Tel Aviv, what is going on in Jerusalem at the time? People are petrified. There's an onslaught. They're waiting for the Jordanians, especially because that's the area where they're fighting, to come in and attack. And they are digging trenches in all sorts of different places to prepare for this onslaught. Those of you who've read the book by Yehuda Avner, The Prime Ministers, he describes the evening incredibly. Now remember this, Jerusalem is besieged. Even though they've managed with the Burma Road and able to bring supplies to Jerusalem, communications are down. Not many people had electricity and running water or even water to drink. And so people literally did not have battery-operated transistor radios. They had no idea what had taken place. We look at the creation of the State of Israel and think, of course, everybody knew what was going on, and thousands obviously did. But people are living in Jerusalem and have no idea what happened that afternoon. So listen to how Avner describes it. Remember, it's Erev Shabbat, and he says like this: daylight was fading fast, and the sun's last rays were receding behind the hilltops of Judea. Grimy, exhausted diggers assembled, hidden from view to recite Kabbalat Shabbat. Suddenly, shots are heard. A shell shrieked and blasted the lower reaches of the mountainside. We rolled, we crawled, searched for cover, and everyone with a gun fired blindly into the night. I have no idea how long this went on for, but eventually it turned quiet. And then the quiet was broken by a crunch of rushing feet, panting breath, and a winded cry of a man. I have news! I have news! It was Mark, Avner says, a man who I had been working with in the trenches. Well, talk, what did you find out, we asked. Has Ben Gurion declared independence, yes or no? Marla took a deep breath and solemnly said, David Ben Gurion declared independence in Tel Aviv this afternoon. The Jewish state comes into being at midnight. There was a dead silence. Even the air seemed to be holding its breath. Midnight was missed away. And then the air exploded in joyful tears and laughter. We pumped hands and we embraced. We roared the national anthem at the top of our voices. Hey, Marla, shouted Elisha. Our state, what's its name? I don't know, says Marla. I didn't think to ask. And so Avner also says we start describing different options. And then he says, well, a l'chaim to our state, whatever its name. And then Nussen, a chosid, a diligent volunteer digger from him, says, it's Shabbos, Kiddush first. And so we crowded around him in a hush as Nussen clasped the mug and with sweet chazonos began to chant, Yom HaShishi. And as Nussen's sacred verses floated off to a higher place, his eyes closed, his cup stretched out and up. And as he concluded his bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat, he rose on tiptoe, his arms stiffened, and rocking back and forth, voice trembling with emotion, he triumphantly added the bracha, She'echianu, V'kiyamanu, V'higianu. Lazman Hazeh. All resounded with a huge amen. And so Avner describes that Friday night on the hills of Ein Karem as the state of Israel was declared in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. Feel free to share. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can all speak. And with the greatest pleasure, if there's time, let's go for some questions.
Jonty, this is Mark Zohar speaking. Rabbi Goldberg had to step away. Before I open up the questions, I just want to thank you very much for a riveting story, exquisitely presented, and it just added content and color that I just didn't know existed. So we want to thank you for that. Henry, did you want to add something?
No, just to thank, I just want to thank Jonty. Really, it was absolutely wonderful. And I hope we can do future things as the weeks go by. But thank you for this. It was really great. And I think you did bring it out to the various, to our friends in the community. And thank you for doing it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure, really my pleasure. Thank you.
Now I'm going to open up for 2 or 3 questions. The way to indicate that you want to have a question is You have a reactions button on the lower part of your screen.
Just leave.
If you have a question, just give me a thumbs up and I will focus the screen on you and you'll be able to ask, and I'll unmute and you'll be able to ask Jonty the question. So,
It's unmuted.
okay, Ralph Marcus.
Yeah. Fighting in Yerushalayim began after Chavtet November and it intensified, or when, how did they, what happened at that time during that period between November and the establishment of the state?
Okay, so the fighting is intense, absolutely intense. It's actually fascinating to watch what happens and how the different areas, where does the fighting takes place. So very soon after the Chavtet November, so you've got the battles in Tel Aviv, but you've got a bomb going on in King George, in the Sochnut buildings, and that is a huge event that rocked the community. Within then, January, February 1948, already Jerusalem is starting to be besieged. And then Jerusalem has a really hard time. So what we are aware of when you drive up to Jerusalem with the trucks on the side of the road, as you pass Bab el Wad, as you pass Sharagai, that's all part of a continued attempt to help Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is being besieged. And that is why the state of Israel was established in Tel Aviv, because one could blame. So Jerusalem has a very, very hard time. And in fact, if you think about it like this, the old city of Jerusalem as the center, as certainly the lev, the heart of, the old city would have stood, well, how much the morale of but it doesn't. That falls on the 28th of May, 1948. So within 2 weeks after the state of Israel is established. So the battles continue for months and months and months. And it's only really by November of 1948 that the battles in Jerusalem and area of what is the West Bank will end, because that is when we come to we sign basically we sign with the Jordanians on some kind of ceasefire. It's not an end to war as such, but that was how, let's call it de facto, the war in the Jerusalem area ended. So it was a full year fighting in the Jerusalem area.
Thank you. George, did you want to ask a question? George Moschitz?
No, thank you. It was brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let me go to the next screen. If anybody wants to ask a question, please hit that reaction button. Just give me a thumbs up. No?
I see Hannah Wheel wants to ask.
Who's that? Oh, Marty. I see.
She's muted. She's muted.
Hold on, Marty. You're.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering if you give us some more background on the controversy using God's name in the declaration and how the compromise of Sur Yisrael v'Goalo came about.
Okay, and then I see that Hannah also wanted to ask. So we'll still get back. There are a number of, as we mentioned, a number of different controversies. One of the major controversies was, will the name of Hashem, will the name of God be included in the Declaration of Independence? And as we're aware, most of the people making the decisions are not frum, they're not datiyim, and on the whole, they're also actually anti. So there was huge arguments as to, will the name Okay, sorry. Did you hear me there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Rav Fishman, who was one of the Mizrahi representatives, he pushed to have the words Sur Yisrael v'Goalo, and people refused. And if you look at the independent, in the actual declaration, we don't have the word v'Goalo in it. It only says Sur Yisrael. And why? Because Sur Yisrael, on one hand, can be interpreted as Hashem, but it can be interpreted as the rocks themselves, the land. And it says, Mitoch bitachon b'Tzur Yisrael, with faith in Tzur Yisrael, whether it's the rocks or the God. That's how the declaration actually is there. But if you look at at Rav Fishman's signature on the declaration, he will add in the concept of Tzur Yisrael v'Goalo. So he'll put in there as he writes that.
Okay, thank you. I think those are all the questions we see, but I do want to tell everybody that Jonty has a series of these lectures, and this will not be the last one, so stay tuned. We'll be back.
Amen. Thank you, and it's wonderful to have been with you.
Amigo. Okay, so
Thank you very much for listening. It was lovely to see you all. I look forward to seeing you on a future occasion. Thanks.
Thank you. Marvelous.
okay. All right, so with that, we'll call it a day. Thank you again, Jonty.
Thank you for arranging it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.